I need file write permission to save the briefing. Both write and bash are being denied in the current permission mode. Let me output the full briefing directly here instead. JRE 2026, Peter Berg, the Sackler family got away with murder, and it's worse than you think. The Hookah Hollywood director took OxyContin once, recreationally, years before making his Netflix series about the opioid crisis, and described it as being dropped in a vat of warm honey. Then he counted the people he personally knew who had died from opioids and ran out of fingers on both hands. Peter Berg's Netflix series Painkiller dropped on the same day the Supreme Court blocked the Sackler family's $6 billion settlement deal, a coincidence so bizarre it reads like a script he couldn't have written. The family behind OxyContin, worth an estimated $20 billion, had tried to buy their way out of criminal prosecution for the deaths of over 600,000 Americans. The Supreme Court said, not so fast. The opioid crisis, how the Sacklers sold heroin in an M&M pill. Peter Berg came on the podcast to discuss Painkiller, his Netflix docudrama about the Sackler family and the opioid epidemic. When producer Eric Newman first approached him about the project, Berg's immediate reaction was to start counting the dead. Friends, children, and 3 of his artistic heroes, Chris Cornell, Tom Petty, and Prince, all taken by opioids. Prince's death hit Berg particularly hard. Berg went to school in Minneapolis during Prince's rise, was an extra in Purple Rain at First Avenue, and knew Prince was legendary for his clean lifestyle, no alcohol, no swearing, and incredible work ethic. The fact that OxyContin got him, Berg said, shaking his head. That was the moment he went all in on telling this story. The deeper Berg dug, the more shocked he became. The Sacklers weren't just negligent, they were strategically brilliant and morally bankrupt. If you just look at the Sacklers from a capitalistic perspective and you apply rules of capitalism, they get A+. They were fucking good at making money. You put like that much morality into the equation and these are some evil human beings. The titrate-up machine, the Sackler business model, was engineered for maximum addiction. OxyContin reps, young, attractive college graduates, were paid bonuses based on the milligram dosage of pills prescribed. A patient comes in with a blown-out back, gets started on 10 mg. When that stops working, the rep pushes the doctor to prescribe 20 mg, then 40 mg, then 80 mg. Purdue manufactured pills up to 85 milligrams, so potent they earned the street name OxyCoffins. These cute little 23-year-old graduates from Ohio State or Duke would come into your office, you're a doctor in some Midwestern town, and in comes this beautiful girl with a brochure that says OxyContin, the one to start with, the one to stay with. Richard Sackler's philosophy, as Berg described it, life is about running away from pain towards pleasure. If you feel pain, the human condition is we want to stay away from pain. He knew he had a miracle product, any pain, physical, emotional, psychic, this little pill would turn it off. You'd feel like you've been dropped in warm honey, and then that honey starts to turn into battery acid. Hammer the abusers. When Purdue realized people were dying, kids crushing up OxyContin and snorting it, patients overdosing, their internal strategy was not to pull the drug or add warnings. It was, in their own documented words, to hammer the abusers. Your 19-year-old daughter has just dropped dead of an OxyContin overdose. The response of Purdue basically is, well, your daughter was a drug addict. I'm so sorry for your loss, but your daughter was a drug addict. Don't blame us. This wasn't speculation, it was their literal written-down strategy. Blame the victims, protect the product, keep the money flowing. The FDA approval scandal, perhaps the most damning part of the story, is how OxyContin got approved in the first place. The entire FDA approval process came down to one man, Curtis Wright. Wright initially refused to approve OxyContin. He recognized it as heroin in pill form. Purdue couldn't get him to budge through flattery, co-authored articles, or charm. Then Purdue took Curtis Wright to a hotel on the East Coast. They spent 2 days in a hotel room together. They emerged with an approval containing unprecedented language. OxyContin is believed to be non-addictive. Think about that language. It had never been used in an approval process before, ever. Is believed, not is not, but is believed to not be addictive. 1 year later, Curtis Wright left the FDA, where he was making roughly $50,000 a year, and went to work for Purdue Pharma at over $400,000 annually. Berg wanted to film what happened in that hotel room. He wrote a scene imagining the most debaucherous 2 days imaginable: monkeys, Thai kickboxing, massage parlors, water sports, jet washing, just the craziest of the crazy. The lawyers shut it down. In the final cut, they simply closed the door. The Supreme Court bombshell in what Berg called the most bizarre coincidence I've ever experienced. The Supreme Court paused the Sackler settlement on the exact day Painkiller premiered on Netflix. The deal would have had the Sacklers pay $6 billion over 2 decades, easily covered by interest on their estimated $15 billion fortune, in exchange for permanent immunity from all future civil and criminal claims. They were basically buying their way to safety for $6 billion. The Supreme Court just said, hold up, not so fast. We're not going to accept that deal. You may have to pay more and we may go after you. The Sacklers remain one of the most internet-scrubbed families Berg has ever encountered. Richard Sackler in particular, you just can't get very little information on them. The disclaimer that became a weapon. Netflix legal required disclaimers before each episode, standard based on fact, but some facts have been changed language. Berg hated it. He felt it let the Sacklers off the hook. His solution was devastating. Each episode opens with a real parent staring into the camera, reading the legal disclaimer, then stopping to hold up a photograph of their dead child. She reads the disclaimer exactly as legal says, And then she stops and she says, but what hasn't been fictionalized is that my 22-year-old son Tommy, and she holds up a picture, died of an OxyContin overdose. The fentanyl ripple effect. The conversation turned to how OxyContin created the conditions for the fentanyl crisis. Opioid use became so normalized that street drugs are now routinely laced with fentanyl. They referenced a recent tragedy in Venice, LA, where a group of comedians doing recreational cocaine at a house party all died because it contained fentanyl. Only one person survived. Tom Petty's death came up specifically. He reportedly got a pill from a sound crew member after a show, and it contained fentanyl. Rogan noted that opioid deaths, over 600,000, represent war-level casualties, exceeding the combined death tolls of Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Iraq. When we were kids, it was very rare that someone died of a heroin overdose. It was always a lost soul, some wild musician or crazy poet. Heroin was reserved for the people that were just not coming back. Nobody was like, yeah, let's go try heroin. But now it's in the news all the time. Berg added that beyond the death toll, the destruction of families is incalculable. Children who lost parents riding the chaotic roller coaster of childhood drug addiction. As a father, he said, one of my biggest fears was God forbid my child should ever experience addiction. Rogan drew a sharp analogy. I think it's funny that people make fun of people who believe in demons, because what would a demon do? Would it go around with a pitchfork being obvious about it, or would it do it through a really evil sociopathic person who decides to manipulate the system and ruin countless lives? The history of marketed poison. Berg and Rogan went down a fascinating historical rabbit hole about pharmaceutical marketing, pulling up actual vintage advertisements. Bayer, the aspirin company, once marketed heroin as the cheapest specific for the relief of coughs. There were ads for cocaine tooth drops promising instantaneous cure. Liquid morphine marketed for teething babies. Put a little liquid morphine on a blanket and let him suck on it. And amphetamines advertised to stay fit and slim. Our grandparents were around for this. The point was clear. The Sacklers didn't invent pharmaceutical deception. They perfected it with modern marketing and legal strategies that their predecessors could only dream of. Berg's personal OxyContin experience. Berg admitted to trying OxyContin once recreationally, about 8 years before making Painkiller. A friend offered him one and he described the experience vividly. It was fantastic. It was like being dropped in a vat of warm honey, and I'm like, holy shit, get this away from me. It works. Heroin works. He acknowledged he was fortunate not to have an addictive gene, but said he could easily see how someone would get hooked. The Sacklers knew this. They understood the pharmacology intimately and knew that once someone experienced that feeling, they'd chase it. Area 51, Bob Lazar, and Los Alamos. The conversation took a hard turn into UFOs and secret military technology when Berg shared a hilarious story about trying to get onto Area 51 while on mushrooms. Berg and his friend Mike Dorio took mushrooms and drove toward Area 51. They drove for what felt like forever without getting closer to the mountain. Eventually, a white van with lights appeared behind them. Military personnel with guns got out, took one look at them and said, "Okay, you guys are on mushrooms, right? We've seen this, turn around. There's a hotel called the Little Alien, go down there with everybody else who's on mushrooms, sit out there all night and have all your theories." Rogan explained that the government had to expand the restricted zone around Area 51 because people like John Lear were setting up powerful telescopes and filming test flights. The stealth bomber and Harrier jump jet both came from programs there. The most fascinating case, Rogan argued, is Bob Lazar, who claims to have worked at S4 Site 4 of Area 51 on a program to reverse engineer a recovered alien disk. Lazar described a reactor working on a then theoretical element that has since been confirmed to exist. Los Alamos tried to deny he ever worked there, but he was found on their employee roster and colleagues confirmed knowing him. If he's full of shit, oh my god, what a great story. This guy's pulled the wool over people's eyes for 30 years. Los Alamos, where the real secrets live. Berg had just been filming near Los Alamos, New Mexico, and was blown away by the current Los Alamos National Laboratory, a facility larger than the UCLA campus, heavily fortified by Homeland Security with reportedly massive underground sections. Forget Area 51. If we're inventing shit, this is the kind of place we're inventing it. He joked that if he were Chinese intelligence, he'd hire attractive women as bartenders and cocktail waitresses in the nearby town bars, since all the Los Alamos scientists go there after work to drink. That's where everything's going down. The facility sits across a river from where Oppenheimer lived during the Manhattan Project, originally a boys' school that the government commandeered, kicking out all the students and moving in scientists. Berg described the Manhattan Project culture as scientists building nuclear bombs by day and drinking and wife-swapping by night. From Kitty Hawk to nuclear bombs, 45 years. Rogan and Berg marveled at the pace of military technology. The Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk was in December 1903. Just 42 years later, a nuclear bomb was dropped from an airplane. That compression of innovation from first flight to nuclear warfare in a single lifetime led them to wonder what classified technology exists today. If Orville Wright could see that, robot wars. 100% robot wars. AI drones, robot wars, and the future of warfare. The conversation turned to AI-controlled military drones, referencing a recent New York Times article about companies scrambling to build AI fighter drones. The future of warfare, they agreed, would be swarms of $3 million AI-controlled drones rather than $60 million manned fighter jets. Cameron had it right. Terminator had it right. Dude, it's on. It's crazy. Berg connected this to the writers' strike happening at the time, noting AI was a central concern. Rogan mentioned the Boston Dynamics robots now capable of acrobatics, and Berg shared his experience visiting MIT's robotics department, where students showed him a robotic cheetah sprinting through hallways and jumping over obstacles. They referenced Black Mirror's Metalhead episode about a robot dog chasing a woman, noting how close that fiction now is to reality. The military-industrial complex and misplaced priorities. Berg's most passionate segment was about military spending versus domestic investment. His experience touring a nuclear submarine at Pearl Harbor stuck with him, the sheer cost of the technology, the missiles, the guidance systems, and he kept doing the math in his head. If you can put 20 nuclear missiles with warheads, guidance systems, propulsion systems on a billion-dollar submarine, one of which being detonated means we're done anyway, why can't we take 2 or 3 of those fucking missiles and do something? He drew a direct line from the Purdue Pharma story to the military-industrial complex, corporations making money off human suffering while the government looks the other way. When I see all this money and tech being thrown into systems, are we ever going to really use this shit? Because if we do, it's game over anyway. I see all these people making so much money, and I'm like, this feels like we're in the same waters we were swimming in when we were dealing with Purdue Pharma. Berg pointed to the Ukraine funding debate, not arguing against supporting Ukraine, but questioning why that kind of money materializes for foreign military aid, but not for American schools, infrastructure, healthcare, or communities. If you can do that, why haven't you looked at the state of emergency that exists in the cities in America? He referenced Eisenhower's farewell speech warning about the military-industrial complex. We have an economy that is now linked to the industrial-military complex. You can't separate them. You can't turn it off. Saudi Arabia's The Line, science fiction becoming reality. The conversation touched on Saudi Arabia's megaproject The Line, a 200-mile-long mirrored city designed for 9 million people with no roads, no cars, and 100% renewable energy. Berg had recently met a Saudi official in charge of ensuring the project who described the scale of wealth involved. We think we know what money is. This is where the money is. They compared it to Dubai's transformation and marveled at the renders, autonomous drone delivery, a structure taller than the Empire State Building, mirror glass facades. Rogan called it literally science fiction turned reality. Pearl Harbor, the USS Arizona, and the weight of history. Berg described a powerful visit to the USS Arizona Memorial at Pearl Harbor, where oil still leaks from the sunken battleship 80-plus years after the attack. Standing on the platform above the wreck, he was deeply moved seeing the oil and realizing the remains of over 1,100 sailors are still entombed inside. He was then given a tour of a modern nuclear submarine, which blew his mind: the technology, the stealth capability, the weapons systems. It crystallized his thinking about military spending versus domestic needs. UFC, boxing, and the future of combat sports. UFC origins. In Rogan's early days, Rogan revealed that he was the post-fight interviewer for the UFC from 1997 to 1998. They pulled up a photo of him interviewing Mark Kerr at UFC 15. He quit because it wasn't cost-effective. He was losing money. He went on to do News Radio and Fear Factor before Dana White brought him back. Rogan's deep knowledge of the sport, training jiu-jitsu 5 days a week, eventually led White to offer him the commentary role. The case for rolling up boxing. Berg, a passionate boxing fan, pitched his dream scenario. One billionaire buys out all boxing's governing bodies, WBC, WBA, WBO, IBF, and all the major promoters, Bob Arum, Al Heyman, Eddie Hearn, for an estimated $1.2 billion to create a single, unified international boxing league, similar to what the UFC did for MMA. His ultimate fantasy, a combined UFC boxing event at Madison Square Garden. The main event UFC fight happens first. He suggested John Jones versus Francis Ngannou as the biggest possible fight, then the octagon lifts up, flips over, and drops down a boxing ring for Terence Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez. One night, one league, Dana owns all of it. I pitched him in Mexico, absolutely drunk. Berg said he'd put Eddie Hearn in charge of the boxing side, calling him the smartest guy in boxing and the face of boxing at this point. Weight classes and weight cutting. Rogan went deep on the problem of weight cutting in UFC, arguing it's as dangerous as the strikes fighters take. He advocated for more weight classes, every 10 pounds minimum, to reduce the incentive for extreme cuts, where fighters dehydrate to dangerous levels only to rehydrate and show up 20-30 pounds heavier than their weight class on fight night. Fighter finances and life after fighting. They discussed how most fighters struggle financially after retirement, contrasting with smart exceptions like Conor McGregor, worth $500 million from his whiskey company, and Mayweather Fight, and Eric Anders, invested in real estate. The emotional toll of losing is unique to combat sports. If you lose a basketball game, you can go home. You don't go to the hospital with your face battered in and the whole world saw you get kicked in the face, and there's memes of you getting flatlined and animations of you getting knocked into orbit. Mark Kerr, the smashing machine. They discussed Mark Kerr, a phenomenal early UFC heavyweight who was an elite wrestler but became addicted to painkillers, connecting back to the opioid theme. Rogan described watching Kerr submit a man by driving his chin into the opponent's eye socket. Berg mentioned that Dwayne Johnson was once interested in playing Kerr in a scripted film, and Rogan recommended the documentary The Smashing Machine. Manny Pacquiao and boxing greatness. They highlighted Manny Pacquiao's staggering record, 12 major world titles across 8 different weight divisions, from flyweight to welterweight. They pulled up photos of his body progression over his career, marveling at the physical transformation. Terence Crawford was discussed as the only man to be undisputed champion in 2 weight classes. Crawford had told Rogan he wanted to fight Canelo, acknowledging he'd need time to move up in weight.